Good morning. My name is Maria Rose Belding. I'm a freshman at American University, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Means Database.
And I'm Grant Nelson. I just finished my second year of law school here at GW. I am the CTO and COO.
This all started with 10,000 boxes of macaroni and cheese and one idea. I was in high school working at the food pantry in my small Iowa hometown, and another congregation decided to donate us a year's worth of macaroni and cheese. That was awesome. Less awesome was them not asking if we actually needed macaroni and cheese. We were faced with a literal wall of craft in our church basement. We serve about 700 people every month in my hometown, and 10,000 boxes before they expired in a year, we weren't going to get through that. So when we got down to the last 4 months, we started to reach out to food pantries that were 5 and 10 and 15 and 20 miles away from us and ask, hey, do you need macaroni and cheese because we're drowning in it? And we just ended up playing phone tag for months. And I ended up in the Iowa November winter throwing out more than 400 of those boxes of macaroni and cheese, looking at the line of clients that we were going to have to turn away because we didn't have enough other food to feed them. And I had the very stereotypical entrepreneur's thought, there has to be a better way to do this. I was incredibly frustrated. I was 15 years old at the time, and I was so frustrated, and I started doing some research. And I realized that this was not an isolated problem. Food banks and other emergency feeding systems threw out more than $600 million worth of product last year because of issues like expiration dates that we dealt with the macaroni and cheese. Retail wasted the same to the tune of $2.5 billion. We have a problem with waste. At the same time, we have an issue with hunger. 50 million Americans are served by a food bank at some point every year, and more than half are served at least once a month. There are more than 60,000 of those emergency feeding systems across the country. That's 12 times as many hospital ERs. We have a problem on both sides, and that's what we're here for. MEAN stands for Matching Access and Need for Stability, and we're a Craigslist for those food pantries to talk to each other and the donors who want to stock them.
So we launched a soft beta in late February this year, and since then we've acquired users in 5 different states that represent a significant portion of the emergency feeding system population.
Our users served more than 50 million meals last year and represent more than 800 partner agencies. In other words, there are more than 800 on-the-ground operations whose high-arcing leadership are on board with MEANS to start communicating.
So the MEANS team. Maria has a lot of in-depth industry experience, and she's the CEO and founder.
I come to the table with more than 10 years of on-the-ground emergency feeding system experience and more than 5 years of professional research and writing experience on both domestic and international poverty and hunger issues. The logos you see behind me are entities that I have written for, worked for under contract, or been recognized by for my work revolving around hunger and poverty.
The fact that Maria has over a decade of experience in this industry is only made more interesting by the fact that she hasn't begun her second decade of life here on Earth. For those of you who are bad at math, she's 19.
Grant is not a slacker either.
So I bring 3 unique sets of skills to the table: legal, entrepreneurial, and technical. Just finished my second year of law school. I've taken classes like VC law, corporation, securities, etc. I worked for a startup for most of 2014. I enjoy working in an environment where all challenges are equally opportunity. And finally, technical. I've been designing websites from scratch for fun and for profit for about 3 years now, including the MEANS database, where I've written every single line of code thus far.
We're not alone. We're also working with 2 individuals to do outreach, Cody in Iowa and Luke in DC, and Zoe here in DC is helping us out with communications and social media.
So let's do a quick demo. How does it work? We have 2 hypothetical people for this presentation, donor Dan and recipient Ron. So donor Dan would log into the system and be met with a field that says, donate something. So say Dan has green beans, which are, of course, vegetables. He clicks submit and doesn't do anything but wait. This is an actual screenshot of what the system looks like now for a green beans item. Upon somebody claiming the item in the system, Dan receives an email that says, FYI, somebody claimed it. You don't have to do anything. They will contact you, and they will come to you. After the transaction exchange actually occurs, there's a feedback email. Each of these links in the email, upon clicked, we automatically know which one was registered, just like newsletters know who clicks which link. For the recipient side, primarily food banks, it's a little different. First, the sign-up. The key parts here are the miles and categories. The miles is the geographical area of interest, that is, how far they're willing to go to retrieve food. And the categories allow them to decide what types of notifications they actually care about and are relevant to them. When they claim, or so, here's recipient Ron. He lives at the White House and is interested in vegetables. When Ron logs in, he'd see something like this, a bunch of listings that match his criteria. Say Ron clicks claim. Ron also receives an email that includes contact information and specific directions for pickup that donor Dan has specified. Similarly, after the transaction, recipient Ron also receives a feedback email that allows him to rate the donor. This feedback is essential. It is the key part of the system. When a recipient receives items quickly, that is, follows through quickly and receives good feedback, they will be notified sooner and sooner as soon as things are posted, which causes donors to have a better experience and rewards the system overall. This feedback has formed the basis for every decision the means database has made so far.
We've done dozens of interviews with emergency feeding systems, large and small, urban and rural, asking each and every one of them, what do you need from us? What are your problems? How can we help you? And we heard the same issues over and over again. Communicating with each other was almost impossible. Dealing with inventory and needs that shifted over time and being able to communicate those needs effectively, and also understanding their own donors. Part of that feedback loop was created because we heard about donors that would say they were going to give X amount and would actually give half of that or a quarter of that. And we wanted to build accountability on both sides for both the donor and the recipient. So revenue. What do we do to make money? Well, first and foremost, we're a 501c3. We're going to take advantage of that. That makes us eligible for both donations and grants. All of these entities, and this is a small percentage of them, there is not a big screen big enough, frankly, to cover everyone who is working in hunger and poverty, but here's a good sampling. The retail industry is looking at how they can donate more food and help more people. Government agencies are looking at how they can reduce both food waste and hunger, and even insurance companies are starting to offer grants to organizations like ours that are working in food insecurity and trying to understand how they can help prevent the health impacts that are strongly associated with hunger, particularly in children.
But we're not content to just merely rely on donations. We've thought of a few different ways we can raise revenue on our own. The most interesting is by keeping a good account of what donations are made by which corporate sponsors. In the status quo, a corporate parent takes the tax deduction nationally, but all the decisions are made at the store individual level. So, come tax time, a lot of this gets lost in the shuffle, and many times large donations are given but never properly accounted for, which leads to corporations that are missing out on lots of tax opportunities.
Food giant Sodexo, which happens to do all of the food services for GW and thousands of other college campuses and other entities across the country, they did $16 billion in business last year, and they donated tens of million pounds of food. Their total tax deduction was zero. They don't have the records to say this is where this was, where it went, to whom, when, how much it was. They need those records. Means by definition is a record of all of those things. We would be able to compile that information for donors, incredibly, incredibly valuable information for them, would allow us to take a cut of that money while also enabling those donors to really take advantage of the good work they're already doing.
Second, transportation. As soon as somebody claims an item in the system, we have a record of where it is, where it needs to be, and some information about the item. We can use this info to solicit bids from various last-mile delivers like LaserShip, Uber, Postmates, etc., take advantage of the competition in that space, and provide these opportunities to the recipients who may decide that it's easier for them to simply pay someone to do delivery.
We're also looking at value-added services like SMS text messaging. This was repeatedly requested by the emergency feeding systems we talked to. This is something our clients want, so we're going to find a way to get it to them. We think it's completely reasonable to charge extra for a service that costs us to provide.
Another thing that people have requested is an API. So we plan on rolling out an API so that people can build apps on top of our system or allow their inventory management systems to communicate to ours behind the scenes without a human. Speaking of technology, we have probably the best technology stack of any charity we've seen, and we've looked pretty hard. We are built on Ruby on Rails, which powered websites like Twitter, etc. for a very long time. Don't take it from me, though. Ruby on Rails developers are the most sought-after developers because of the power and flexibility of the language. In addition, we're on Heroku and Amazon Web Services, which powers Netflix, which accounts for a third of the internet's traffic every night. They can surely support means, and it means we can scale incredibly quickly by firing up more computers. So expenditures. The large hump here represents summer. We want to hire some of our current volunteers for the summer to help pound the pavement and get the word out. And additionally, we'd like to hire Maria so that she can devote her entire summer to this endeavor. After summer, it tapers out a bit. The good news is running a website is relatively easy from an electricity hosting standpoint, but developing new features is not. So we need to hire a second developer, and Maria's going to talk about our growth strategy.
First and foremost, we want to expand our staff. Grant is awesome. Grant is also one person. Today is Grant's last day in his second year of law school. He also has class, as do I. We need another developer to help us fully bring this into fruition and develop all of the services that have been requested of us. We also have 2 individuals completely devoted to outreach. A good chunk of what I do is outreach, and we are still not meeting the demand. We're still struggling to keep up with email volume. So being able to really flesh out those outreach positions and be able to secure people for the summer would really, really help us. We also want to engage our volunteers. We've had dozens of students from both American and GW come to us and ask, how can we help? We know that they can help us by pounding the pavement and getting out to those food banks and really explaining this concept to them. Funds would help us engage those volunteers and basically grow our communication system. Finally, we need to reach our audience. I have had 3 different speaking engagements in the last 6 months to talk about means in front of audiences at things like the Kansas Hunger Dialogue, which are purely emergency feeding system sources. I've been unable to accept those because they can't afford to bring me, and I'm a college student, so I can't afford to go to them. Funds would help us reach our audience and get into rooms where truly everybody within 50 miles that runs a food bank is sitting in front of us, and we would get to talk about means.
So on the ground, logistically in the trenches, what does this look like? We can sign up food banks with the pitch that it is a no-risk option for them. If something that they're interested in within their radius is posted, they receive a notification. If not, it's as if we don't exist. We can do this for multiple food banks in an area, and then triangulate what areas have the most demand, go to donors or potential donors there, and almost guarantee that somebody will pick it up. So from this strategy, we solve the chicken and the egg problem. This allows us to go to donors and say, if you were to donate something to our system, you're able to waste less, and the food banks will be able to feed more. Thank you.
Have you found issues with certain food banks having more protein, for example, more that's disposable versus is inter-food bank transfers is what I'm getting at. I'm involved with one in Colorado, and that's been a big deal depending on the locale of the project in the food bank.
Yes, there was a day that we had one staffer at Capillary Food Bank here in DC and another one at So Others Might Eat, or SOME, which is on O Street. On the same day that SOME had to spend an extra, I believe it was $1,000 on salad to cover for the fact that they hadn't been able to secure dessert donations, Capillary Food Bank was turning away dessert donations because they couldn't carry it anymore. These guys are 2 miles apart at maximum. We have heard so many and over about the inter-food bank transfer, and most of them are geographically close. It's just communicating when you have 100 in 20 miles.
Right, so you mentioned about an API, and would it be good to almost have a Facebook-type board, either mobile or desktop, attached to the site?
Mm-hmm. So we initially made a site a while ago and pitched it to food banks that pretty much required that they change their behavior and visit the site. I hate notifications, so I assumed that that was the way to go. It turns out what food banks would prefer is a more in-your-face style of notification, such as emails. And we think that the donors so far prefer to not have to interact with the site as much as possible. So merely clicking links on emails is how we'd like to do that. But you're absolutely right. We do plan on expanding the alert notification channels as we grow.
So there's, as you said, there's a number of organizations working in the emergency food delivery system, and there's a number of foundations, both on the corporate side and the private side, as well as community foundations that are funding in those issues, and they're looking at a significant amount of overlap, right? Even in board membership, there's significant overlap. So my question for you is, who do you see as competition? Who do you see as opportunities for partnership? And who do you want to be when you grow up? What organizationally? You should be you when you grow up. But organizationally, who would you like to be?
We would love to be a system like Feeding America. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Feeding America. It's the largest food bank network in the country. They do really well on economies of scale. They move a lot of things very quickly in very, very large quantities. We want to be that efficient. This is all about efficiency in time and in management. I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of the second half of your question. And competition. You want to talk about?
So there's another organization foodtodonate.org is the website. FDC is their initials. I forgot the full name. But they do something very similar. They're the ones that have validated the model of getting tax deductions as part of their revenue model. But what they do is a very hands-on approach where the personnel, the management of the company has to be very involved in every transaction. And so what we're trying to do is become more of an exchange that is built on trust, backed by a feedback loop, as well as, eventually the social element that provides so much cohesion for websites like Facebook, et cetera.
And one more question, very quickly. Food banks generally say, and it's generally believed, that the best possible donation is just cash, right? Because they can purchase at scale in a way that donations don't happen, and they can purchase what they want or need. Is there some mechanism by which you can then activate donors to also think about the cash as opposed to to your point, wall-o-craft?
That is a fantastic idea, and I know so many food bank directors who would want to hug you right now for suggesting that. People like to donate things. They like to have the wall of macaroni and cheese to take a picture in front of and say, look what we did, and that's great. Cash is not as tangible. It's more helpful, but it's not as tangible. Food drives are incredibly popular. They're a really big deal. This is kind of part of the donation market, even though it's not as efficient as cash. That would be a really cool thing to build in, frankly, if we could start encouraging people to look at the more efficient way to donate. But in the current climate, most people like to do, here's food drive, here's the food in bulk.
So one idea that keeps popping in my head is this idea of a perishability date, vegetables, things that have a very clear short shelf life. To what extent, and I was intrigued by the SMS comment, so there's a missing, it seems like there's a broken component in the current system where there's a missing exchange mechanism, and you guys are proposing to fix that, and that's, as I understand it, unique to you guys, right? So I'm kind of shocked by that, only because to me, and here it is, 2015, that people don't send SMS messages that they've got a couple thousand heads of lettuce, and if somebody doesn't pick it up by tomorrow, it's going to rot.
Grant actually, I apologize for laughing, Grant didn't believe me when I told him that this was a problem coming from the emergency feeding system world.
It took her weeks to convince me that phones don't solve this, that emails don't solve this, et cetera. It turns out that it really is that inefficient. The problem with email chains and the status quo is one person will post something, the next 500 responses are, is it still available or can I have it? And phones are one-to-one communication, assumes you know they're open, you know their contact info, and that they know what you want. So you're right. What's missing is an exchange. We're fundamentally a two-sided market maker.
I have a question about, so our University District of Columbia, we have a 143-acre farm in Beltsville, about 20 minutes from here. And the amount of food we waste, even though we give bread to the city, DC Central access to come and pick and take whatever they want. When you talk waste here and when you talk about connectors, is the farm waste part of that equation and dialogue?
Yes. On that big wall of logos of people that I have worked with, one of them is the USDA, both state as in Iowa and the national office. We heard about food waste in farmers markets and at the gleaning level a lot. And one of the things, we're actually working with Iowa Secretary of Agriculture, Bill Northey, because that was a market that they're really interested in addressing and solving. So once we get the food banks really on board, like Grant said, and triangulate and get those markets where we know that we've got a lot of food banks in one area signed on, we're going to start pulling in those farmers markets and those gleaners and tell them all you have to do is put it on the website and somebody will come get it.
Add market maker to your list of partnerships because they have now done a connector amongst farmers that can then save you some door-to-door stock.
Thank you.
Sure.
So you've defined the problem well, but where's the friction in the problem? What's the thing you need to overcome in your model to make it successful?
Can you be more specific?
Well, you define the elements of the problem, but to attack it successfully, you have to look at where the greatest impedance is, where the issue is, and then prescriptively solve it. So I'm trying to understand where that is.
The greatest friction, I would say, is in the communication and the understanding. Most food pantries know they have a neighbor 2 or 3 streets over or 2 or 3 miles away. Even entities, very, very large entities, the Salvation Army doesn't have a list of all of the Salvation Armies in the country. They just don't. Feeding America doesn't have a list of all of their partner agencies. It's very, very loosely connected because it's often run by volunteers. That makes it incredibly inefficient.
So one suggestion I have is the informal notion of social media and informing through blogging, through posting, through articles, because what happens now is people read and they're searching for problems. It's a very efficient way of getting your message out with not a lot of cost. So if you just promote the answer, somebody's going to find you, I guarantee it.
Thank you. Actually, we've been working on that. In the past 2 months, we had both Youth Service America and the World Food Program write about means. I spoke and gave a keynote address at the, Universities Fighting World Hunger Summit in Canada. We've been starting to do as much press as we can. My connections as a writer, I believe in the next 3 months, I have 2 more pieces coming out about means, and just really trying to use that online social media and blogging sphere to get the word out.
And then the most important thing is case studies. So define an example so people go, oh, I get it. That's exactly what's going to work. So build references and referenceability.
Thank you.
Thank you.